welcome to the channel. It has definitely been a minute since I filmed in this setup, but hello, hi, welcome. Wanted to do this video because today marks 18 months of me living in this house. And I put a question box out on my Instagram to see if any of you had questions about either the house buying process, buying a new build property, buying as a solo buyer, or just anything in general around moving, house buying, house decorating, etc. Anyway, quite a few of you responded with those questions. I put them all into my phone and I thought we could start. I'm actually going to start on the questions that were focused more on like what the process is and kind of buying a new build versus different styles of properties. So let's jump in. So the first question is, why did you choose a new build property over an older property? That's a really good question. So when I originally put my flat on the market and was looking at somewhere to move to, new builds were not actually on my radar. I didn't think that I would move into a new build just because I personally don't think new builds cater that well to people that are going to be in a chain. Like if you're a new build developer or you're a new build builder, then you tend to prefer people who are cash buys, and they tend to be first time buyers or people who have already completed on that chain and they're already in a position to move in straight away. Just because I find that most developers, in particular my developer that I went with, they wanted me to exchange within about 8 weeks, which if you're a first time buyer, it's completely doable because there's no chain. I obviously did have a chain. I was selling to people who were first time buyers, but I was buying a new build. So actually my chain was very short. Still took a really, really long time, but it was actually quite short in comparison. There obviously could have been like more stages of the chain. So in that respect, I didn't think a new build was going to be in my options just because I knew that I wouldn't be able to complete as quickly as I wanted to. Selling a property takes a really long time in the UK, and especially because I was selling a flat, which was a leasehold property. So a leasehold property essentially means that I didn't own the ground. I owned kind of my bit, but I didn't own the ground that we were on. The leaseholder company did. Because it's a block of flats, like that's pretty standard. You do obviously have some flats that are freehold, but most kind of flat apartment style buildings are leasehold, sorry, not freehold. And because of that, that just meant that the buying process took a little bit longer. Having to deal with the leaseholder and the management company in particular was not a fun experience. I could probably do a whole entire video on what that process was like, but it just in essence took a really long time. So I didn't think a new build was going to be in my kind of future. I didn't think it was going to be an option. But that said, about 2 months after putting my flat on the market and about a month after accepting an offer and thinking, I should probably start thinking about where I'm going to be moving to, this property ended up coming up on Rightmove. I hadn't seen it before and it popped up in an area that I was kind of looking at. I had like a set area that I was looking at, and this one had come up because of the fact that this had already fallen through twice, I think, with the same buyer. So this house was quite unique in the sense that it was already built. So it was done and it was ready to move into. I didn't think that they would let me reserve it or put the offer in because of the fact that I was in a chain, but luckily they did, and here I am. So the next question is, what was the reservation and buying timeline like? So I've kind of covered that a little bit, but in essence, I saw it on Rightmove on, I don't know, maybe like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, put in the request to go view it for the Friday, couldn't go and view it until I'd done the pre-qualification with their mortgage broker. Did that on the Thursday, booked in to go see it on the Friday, went to go view it, absolutely kind of fell in love. It really was one of those things that a lot of people say will happen but hadn't happened up until that point, which was when you know, you'll know. Like you'll just walk into the house or the property and be like, this is it, this is my home. And I'd seen, I want to say maybe about 8 or 9 properties at that point, and I hadn't had that feeling with any of them. I'd walked in, they were all nice. I could all like imagine myself living there. You know, I could imagine where my furniture would go and how I would decorate, but none of them had that kind of instant I'm home feeling. This was the only one that did. So I saw it, I loved it. I actually saw it with my mum. She also loved it. We went back to the sales office and said I wanted to come back next week and bring somebody else to come view it. I wanted to bring my stepdad just to see, like, get his approval and his thoughts on this as well. And if all went well, I was probably going to put the reservation fee down. At that point, they obviously wanted to understand where I was in my chain. They wanted to make sure that my sale was going to go through. They wanted to make sure that they'd already done the searches on the property that I was selling. They wanted to make sure that they'd already requested the management packs as well, just because they were obviously aware of how long it can take when you're trying to sell a leasehold property. All of those things had happened though, because by that point, yeah, I was like 6 weeks into the sale of my property. So we were a little bit further ahead. We didn't know about any of the challenges that were lying ahead of us, but it felt quite confident that this was going to go ahead, hopefully within their timeline. So that was all happening in the August. I came back the following week. I liked it. I put my reservation fee down. My reservation fee was £2,000. I know some people's reservation fees might only be like 500 or something. Mine was 2,000, and then started to sign the paperwork, which was looking at an exchange and completion by October, which was going to be 2 months from when I'd seen it, which in theory would have meant that I was about 3.5, 4 months into my selling process. And in theory, that shouldn't have been a problem. Unfortunately, my selling process took way longer. Okay, so the next question is, did you use a Help to Buy or any government scheme? The answer is no, I wasn't eligible because I'm not a first time buyer. When I bought my flat, I also couldn't use any because they didn't exist. I bought my flat, gosh, coming up for 8 or 9 years ago now. I obviously don't own it because I sold it, but I was there for about 7 years. I paid stamp duty on that because also at the time, first time buyers still had to pay stamp duty, whereas at the moment there's different thresholds that mean that if you're buying a property under a certain value, I don't think you do. So there was no government schemes that I could take part in. The only thing I did do with the flat, which I obviously couldn't do this time, is the Help to Buy ISA. So as I was saving money into that, the government top it up by a quarter. So I think it's for every £200 you put in, they give you £50. I did use that the first time that I bought to help cover the legal fees, etc. And that was really good. I think the government schemes are amazing at helping people get on the ladder, and obviously if you're eligible, definitely look into them. I wasn't though. I had to do this without any. Okay, so the next question is, how involved was I in choosing the finishes and the fixtures? And I was not involved at all because the house was already built. So the house that I'm in and the houses that my neighbours are in, like we're on this little street here, these were all kind of just pre-done. I think originally the developer wasn't going to build on this bit of strip of land. I think the original landowner was selling each individual plot to people to kind of build their own, but I guess that didn't really happen. So they ended up selling this strip of land to the developer that had all the other land that they're developing on. And they've decided to build these properties and furnish them all out. So me and all my neighbours saw these properties when they were already done. There was no option to, or as far as I know, I definitely didn't have any option to pick anything or choose anything. Really lucky that I'm very happy with what was already in here. It's very neutral, like the kitchen's white with a dark wood worktop. The bathrooms are very neutral with kind of off-white tiles. The flooring's incredibly neutral. So to be fair, I probably would have changed some parts, but I wouldn't have changed too much. Some of my neighbours have very different styles of kitchens in terms of the colour. Some of them have got very dark kitchens, which personally for me, I'm glad I've got a lighter kitchen. That's just my personal style and preference. Would it have been nice to have picked everything? Absolutely. Although I think I probably would have gone a little bit crazy with the cost because it's always an added expense. Sometimes you can negotiate on it, but it's always that added expense of if you want more tiles, if you want this type of flooring, etc. It just adds up very quickly. So no, I didn't get to pick anything in here. It was all done. It was all ready to move in. And yeah, basically I could just rock up and put my stuff in. So no input whatsoever. So next up, somebody's asked, would I buy a new build again? I absolutely would buy a new build again. I've actually had a really great new build buying experience. Yes, there have been snags with this property because this property it's made by people, it's made by humans. Do you know what I mean? It's not produced in a factory and popped out perfectly. Like there will be some issues, but I also have to say that actually all the issues that I've had have been dealt with, and they've been dealt with incredibly quickly. Even now, so I'm obviously 18 months in and I've still had little issues that have come up that I can just log with the customer service team, and literally within like a week somebody's out looking at it, which I actually think is really good. I know property companies and kind of new build developers do get a lot of, they don't get the best press, and I think it's very easy to speak negatively about them, and obviously those kind of stories are the ones that get a lot of attention. But I have to say, credit where credit's due. My developer and my house builder have actually been really good, and they are a massive house builder, to the point that I actually thought, gosh, these people might not be the best just because they are so big. But actually I can't fault them. I think buying a new build for me has been perfect. I was coming from a flat, going into a house, wanted to, I'm buying this on my own, and I didn't really have the money, the time, or the skills to take on a renovation project. I would love to at some point. I think that would be amazing. I also know it would probably be the most stressful thing that I end up doing, but I knew that really wouldn't be an option. I was plowing literally every single penny that I had into buying this property, and because of that, I knew that I wouldn't have extra funds to be able to change anything. So the fact that this is all new and it means I don't have to change anything was a big plus for me. Plus the fact that it's covered for 2 years under the house builder's warranty. So I also knew that if there was things like a leak in the bathroom, which I have had, it just meant that I knew that I could be able to call them and they would be able to come and fix it. And I had that happen on Easter Sunday. They still sent somebody out, even though it was obviously a bank holiday. Somebody got it sorted. They fixed the leak immediately. Obviously, I did have a hole left in my ceiling, but they boarded it up. And then literally the next working day, I had the guys around on site who were coming around to plaster it. And then a week later, they came back to paint it. I can't fault that. I just think that was actually pretty good. And I know people do ask this quite a bit. The house builder that I bought from was Taylor Wimpey. And I know that they don't always get the best press, but my experience, they've been nothing but great for me. Okay, so next up are some questions based on the buying as a solo buyer. And the first one is, how did I prepare financially for things like the deposit, the mortgage, and the budgets? How did I prepare for financially? Not probably as much as I should have done. I feel like it doesn't matter how much you save for a house move or a house purchase, you will always need more money because everything just costs so much more. So I obviously ended up buying and then selling a property. So that means I had 2 sets of legal fees to pay because I had to pay my solicitors to sell my property and I had to pay them to help with the purchase. I obviously had stamp duty to pay, which obviously you only pay once, but I had to pay stamp duty. I then also had estate agent fees to pay because I had to pay the estate agents to sell my property. So already it was a lot more than I thought it was going to be. Again, with the legal process, because I was selling a leasehold, that ended up costing a little bit more. We had to get a deed of variation done on the property deeds. That cost an extra, I think it was about an extra 3,500, completely unexpected, suddenly had to pay them. So yeah, it was a lot. The one thing I would say as well about buying a new build, which massively helped me, was the fact that they were offering deposit contribution schemes. So as much as some developers offer to cover your stamp duty, some developers obviously throw in lots of extras. My particular developer was looking at offering deposit contributions. So because this property was the last one to sell and it'd already fallen through twice, they were offering 5% deposit contributions, which was massive because it basically meant that that was in essence free money to me. It meant that I needed to come up with about 20,000 less than what I needed to because they were throwing in the 20,000, which was huge. It just meant that I could afford to get this house because without that, I don't think I could have afforded a house that I'm in at the moment. So in terms of budgeting and planning, I knew for about, when I bought my flat, I thought I'd be there for 2 years. I was there for almost 7. We did have a pandemic in the middle of that, which, I think kind of threw everything. But I knew at the point of which I'd last remortgaged for a 2-year mortgage deal that I wanted to have sold it by the end of those 2 years. So I was starting to plan and to save a lot more money because I knew that as much as my deposit is my equity in my flat, you need all those other costs. You need the cost of the solicitors, the stamp duty, the estate agents, because you can't put those costs onto your mortgage. You have to have the money to pay them. So while I was just saving as I regularly did, I really kind of upped it probably about 18 months beforehand just to try and make sure I had as much money as possible to do everything, because you also don't necessarily want to do what I did, which is I moved into this property with literally like £20 in my bank account. Like, I had no money left by the time everything had gone through, just because it took so much longer, it was so much more expensive, etc. So I would probably suggest that people don't do that, and that you make sure you have some money saved away for when you move in, because you want to furnish places and you want to decorate, and you need that money in case something goes wrong, because you're now responsible for everything. So yeah, I should have saved probably a little bit more, but we did it in the end. So my advice is just save, and when you think you've saved enough, just save a little bit more. Okay, so this is a really interesting question. Somebody asked, what compromises did I have to make? Did I compromise on the size, or did I compromise on the area? And I think that's really true. I think what usually happens when you're buying a property is you have to pick between either your dream location or the dream property, because it's usually quite hard to get the dream property in the dream location for your budget. What I found especially is that I specifically thought that I was going to move to one particular little market town. However, it's quite an expensive little market town because it is so nice. And that meant that the type of properties I was looking at were 2-bed properties, which I was leaving a 2-bed flat, which was quite a big 2-bed flat. So leaving the 2-bed flat to potentially move to a 2-bed property where I would be gaining a garden, you know, and a drive. Size-wise though, internally, the property wasn't going to be any bigger. In fact, in some cases, some of the properties were actually smaller, which did make me think I'm probably going to outgrow this quite quickly, which meant I did end up compromising on the location to be able to move to where I'm currently living, because I'm now in a 3-bed detached property, which is a lot bigger. I have a lot more space. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've definitely filled it. It's not a case of I've got rooms where I don't do anything in, like everything is filled, but it just meant that I had that kind of room to grow a little bit, and I've got a much bigger garden that I'm obviously been kind of turning into my little dream garden. So I definitely did have to compromise. This location was one of the locations that I was looking at, and I did have, or I still do, so I have people who live here who I know. So it was always on the list, but it's different location compared to that previous one. This is slightly further out of London, so it does take me a little bit longer to get to and from work. I'm a little bit further away from the hometown that I grew up in and where my mum still lives, but I'm also a lot closer to where my dad lives, and I'm a lot closer to where my brother lives. So yeah, I do feel like buying a property is always a compromise, and you just have to be really clear with yourself of what is the priority, if it's the location or whether it's the house. And for me, it was the house. Okay, this is another really interesting question of what was your experience like getting a mortgage as a single buyer? Now, I bought my flat on my own, so I've already gone through the process already, and obviously had to go through that process again. It is a lot tougher doing it on your own. There's no kind of denying that, because there's only one salary to look at. You know, they're not taking 2 salaries, which would be a lot nicer. They're just taking your 1 salary. So there is a lot of pressure on yourself or on the individual buying to ensure that you're trying to really maximize what your salary is, just to help with that multiple. The deposit, because I knew I had quite a bit of equity in the flat, I knew my deposit was covered. It was trying to make up the difference of, if we take total house price and we take out deposit, this bit I have to get a mortgage for, and it is a chunky amount, and it's quite daunting actually, the size of the mortgage. I have doubled my mortgage from my flat. So in my flat it probably would have been cleared in about 16 years if I'd stayed there, which is still a long time, don't get me wrong. But instead, I took the number that was left on the mortgage and I said to the bank, I want to double it. And luckily enough, I could just about afford to pay that mortgage at double. But it wasn't just doubling in terms of the amount that I was now borrowing, it obviously doubled in terms of what my monthly payment is. So my monthly payment had been incredibly low for about 7 years, because it also always been around 1.5% interest, which obviously right now interest rates are not 1.5%. My interest rate is currently 4.5%, but I have locked in for 5 years and it's manageable. Okay, this is a really interesting question, which is, what budgeting tips do I have for furnishing a whole house? I would say and it's really hard, because when I bought my flat, I was obviously so excited. I was so excited buying this as well. And I don't know about everyone else, but my imagination was kind of running wild with, I'm going to do this in this room, and I'm going to do this in this room. And I was saving all these images on Pinterest, and I was, looking at all these websites and adding all this kind of furniture to my basket or to my wish list, being like, I'm going to have a dining room that looks like this, and I want my couch to be like this, and this kind of bed. And, you kind of do all of that, and then you realise you probably spent the best part of about £15,000, and you're like, oh, hold on a minute. Don't have that kind of money to decorate. So the first thing I would say is just wait, is to, as much as you can, just really live in the space first. Because I made so many mistakes of just buying things before I'd actually moved in, and then realising that they don't quite fit, they're not quite the vibe, it doesn't work for the space, and then feeling a little bit like, I don't want to now get rid of this furniture because I've spent money on this furniture, but also thinking like, I really wish I'd waited because it's not quite how I want it to look. So if you can, and I know it's really hard, my advice would be to wait a little bit and live in the space. The other bit of advice I would say is that if you're planning on being in that property long term, what's the rush? Like, scour Facebook Marketplace, go on to like little neighborhood WhatsApp groups and stuff, and just see what is out there that you can take just to kind of make do initially. Obviously that's not always perfect or ideal, but sometimes you just need a dining room table. And does it really matter what the dining room table is when you can put a tablecloth over it? Because dining room tables, dining room chairs, sofas, all of those things are really expensive. So my best friend would be Facebook Marketplace. I used that quite a lot when I was furnishing my flat, just because I moved in and I managed to get a sofa and I had my bedroom furniture, and like that was it. And it was like, oh, I really need a dining room table and chairs, and I really need other bits and bobs. So definitely kind of wait out. The other thing I would say is spend money on things that are going to really add value to the property. And obviously furniture doesn't add value to the property. Furniture is obviously lovely to spend a lot of money on if you can afford it, but also IKEA is brilliant, Habitat is brilliant, Facebook Marketplace is brilliant. Like, you don't need to spend loads of money. The things that I've spent most money on in this property, in this house, are things like the built-in wardrobes, because I know that that's going to add not a huge amount of value to the property, but it's going to add some value to the property because I'm building in storage. I've spent quite a lot of money on the garden. Again, it might not add huge amounts of value to the property, but it's definitely going to add a bit of value, because it means that, if I was to come to sell it in a couple of years' time, somebody doesn't need to spend money in the garden because it's kind of already done. So for me, that's where kind of my money's going to. Oh, and this is a really good question as well: how to stay calm and not overwhelmed through the house buying process. I feel like there's a reason why the house buying process is one of the most stressful things that you can go through, and that's because it is really stressful. It's also something that I feel like, because you don't do it that often, even if you've done it before, you can sometimes forget what the process is. So obviously I had bought my flat, but when I came to buying this, I was also selling, and I hadn't done the selling bit before, but the purchasing bit had been 7 years previously. So I was really unfamiliar with what I actually needed to do. So the one thing I would say is to really try and just remember, it will be stressful. It will feel at some points like you just don't know if anyone's doing anything. That might be, you don't know if your solicitors are doing anything. You don't know if your buyer's solicitors or your seller's solicitors are doing anything. You might feel like the estate agent really isn't doing anything. That will always be there, as in you'll always at some point feel as if nothing is moving forward. But just know that stuff is moving forward. You just might not know about it. And also just accept that unless by some miracle you have an absolute smooth process, it probably will take longer than what they think it will take. I think it can be done in as little as 8 weeks. I don't think I actually know anybody who's done it in as little as 8 weeks, unless they were a first-time buyer buying a new build. I think the more average is like even 12 weeks, I think would be extraordinary. My personal experience is that it's taken on average, my first one took 4.5 months and this one took 9. So take from that what you will, and you've just got to try and remember that like it will all work out in the end, and you've just got to trust the process. You've got to ride out the process, and just, hope that you get really good solicitors and a good estate agent, because they'll do a lot of the heavy work for you, so you won't have to feel as stressed during the process. So that would be my advice. So this has been my house buying process video to mark 18 months in this home. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, let me know in the comments below. And if you've got any other questions, leave them there and I'll answer them in the comments. And I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.